Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
At sunrise, the sun was illuminating the beautiful village. Neat houses stood one after another, accentuated by pink and slightly yellowish rays rising from the edge of the sparse pine forest. Somewhere in the distance, a cow mooed, then another one, and then a third. Soon, the village was filled with familiar summer morning sounds. And only those who wholeheartedly loved the simple and peaceful village life could appreciate this morning's beauty. Lorenza Jimenez was standing by the fence, holding a bucket of freshly milked milk in her hands, watching the dawn unfold. She would soon leave the village and start studying, and a completely different life would begin. "Lorenza, are you about to move to the city? Your mom always used to say, it's good to be useful where you were born, but it turned out that you want to run away," the neighbor said. A stout woman with thick braids smirked, glancing at the young girl. "I bet the big city life lures you, right? Or perhaps you're already planning to marry a prince," she teased. "No, Valeriana, I want to study, work, and maybe even get an academic degree," Lorenza said, proud of her plans. An academic degree? People who live in the city are running away from the hustle and bustle, from the endless rat race, and here you are, as if dropped from the moon, planning to head to the city. "Your friend is staying in the village, and you're running away," the neighbor protested, still smiling. There was no malice in her objections, rather, it was just ordinary curiosity and interest. A slender woman left the house, wrapped in a thin scarf she had knitted a few months ago. Mornings have become chilly, soon autumn would arrive, and they would start preparing for winter, like everyone in the village. Serafina Jimenez approached her daughter, and the neighbor immediately seized the opportunity to chat. "I suppose you're not thrilled that your girl is about to leave for the city?" Valeriana asked. "Let her go. It's time for her to make her own mistakes. It's no use trying to explain it to her. She never listens," Serafina replied. "We all didn't at her age," Valeriana said, then laughed. Lorenza left her mother chatting with the neighbor and went into the house to strain the milk and put it in the fridge. She already imagined waking up in the city and getting ready for college. It would be a completely different life without all these village duties and without the endless array of problems that seemed to snowball every day. Lorenza already pictured herself at university. She diligently prepared, passed exams, got a scholarship, and couldn't be happier that she would now receive a higher education, work in her field, and become a respected person. Most of all, Lorenza was afraid of staying in the village. She saw no prospects for life here. The door creaked open, and Natalia peeked in. Lorenza immediately embraced her, realizing that they would hardly see each other after spending months apart, even though they had been together since kindergarten. Overcoming such a separation was hard. They were like sisters. They had stopped going to kindergarten together and then went to school, but their plans and views on the future diverged. "Lorenza, why on earth do you need to go to the city? Stay with us, look at this nature, the tranquility and the beauty. Will you have the same in the city? Will you have the same sunrise as here? You'll leave, and then you'll regret leaving your mother. She's not getting any younger," Natalia pleaded. "Oh, come on, Natalia, I've already made up my mind. For some reason, everyone around me thinks they know better than me what I should do and what I shouldn't," Lorenza replied. "I'm going to get married, have a child, and take care of my family, and you'll spend years studying, then have a child, and nobody will need your diploma. So why not save time?" Natalia asked hopefully. Lorenza didn't judge her friend's life choices, but she wanted to achieve something in life, not just have a child and then put her status on social media as a happy wife and mom. "I don't know how to convince you. I don't want you to leave." Marina went to the city, came back pregnant, and now she's a single mother in the village and doesn't know where to find work. "Why do you need this city? Look at our beauty here," Natalia said, tears welling up in her eyes. Lorenza felt the pain of their impending separation, but she understood that if she wanted to achieve something, she had to take risks. Besides, Lorenza had dreamed of moving for too long and didn't want to give it up just because everyone around her wanted her to stay. Your mom probably cries all day that you're leaving her alone in the village. She's lost so much weight, Natalia said, touching on a sensitive topic. Serafina did indeed worry about her daughter. She didn't want her to go to the city, but Serafina quickly realized that her daughter wouldn't listen to her. She would leave anyway, even if her mother gave her an ultimatum. Serafina entered the kitchen, carrying a basket of apples. Natalia, seizing the opportunity, turned to the woman. "What's going on, Serafina? Why is she so determined to go far away from us to the city? Who persuaded her to go there? And she doesn't listen to anyone's advice. We all unanimously tell her to stay with us. What's there in that city that we don't have here?" she exclaimed, turning to her friend's mother. "There are prospects for the future, and here there are only cows, chickens, goats, and nothing more," Lorenza blurted out, then threw the cloth on the table and dashed out onto the street. Serafina just shook her head, looking at the girl she had known since early childhood. "It's okay, Natalia, I've come to terms with it. Nothing will convince her otherwise. Let her go. It won't be long before she returns, mark my words. The city attracts everyone, but it can swallow you whole. The people there are different," the woman said. Serafina was left alone. By the time her daughter returned, the smell of apple pie wafted from the oven. Her mother remained silent, occasionally nodding as if engaging in some internal dialogue. Lorenza noticed how much weight her mother had lost, though she was never overweight. It was evident she was worried about her daughter. On one hand, Lorenza felt terribly sorry for her mother, but on the other hand, she feared leaving her alone here and feared that something irreparable would happen. "Mom, can't you at least support me? I want what's best for me. I won't have another life," the girl said, nervously hoping for her mother's support. "Oh, come on, since you've decided to go, go ahead. You got a scholarship. We're just worried about you, we're of a different age. I know everything about that city, as I have lived there for many years. But now you won't lure me there with anything. Maybe you'll change your mind, come back to the native village, or, on the contrary, you'll settle in so well that you'll stop visiting your mother in the village," Serafina said. She felt tears welling up. The woman covered her face with her hands, and her daughter came up and hugged her tightly. Lorenza kissed her mother on the forehead, and they stood like that until Serafina calmed down. Dawn was breaking on the horizon. Serafina was standing at the bus stop, and her daughter was dozing off beside her. Lorenza hardly slept, deeply troubled, unable to calm down because, from this moment on, a completely different life she had longed for and a life her mother had never wanted for her would begin. "People in the city are mean, you'll quickly realize that it's not at all like in the village," Serafina said, looking at her daughter, not wanting to argue with her in the last hours they could spend together. "Mom, don't overthink it. People live in the city somehow, and nothing happens. Why should it be different for me?" Lorenza asked, then stared off to see where the bus was about to arrive. Finally, the large bus, packed with people, started to approach, swaying from side to side. Lorenza hugged her mother one last time and then sat down, thinking about how she would settle in the new place, how she would come to university, where she had been accepted, and how everything would be different, not like in the village. Serafina was standing beside the bus, waving to her daughter, quietly wiping away tears, afraid that this meeting might be one of the last. First, she stopped seeing the village in the window, and then the whole landscape changed. Lorenza was watching as everything around her became more civilized, tidy, and soulless at the same time. She felt ashamed that she hadn't bid her mother farewell properly and left in such a hurry, ignoring everyone who had asked her to stay. But most of all, Lorenza feared missing her chance, staying in the village without ever experiencing city life, full of opportunities and happy moments. More and more often, she could see modern villages, and then everything became urban. Small houses were replaced by towering skyscrapers, which unimpressively loomed over people. Lorenza got off the bus and walked her usual path. In 20 minutes, she found herself in a small rented apartment, which she could afford, and for some reason, she felt sad. No longer would she wake up at dawn to the smell of freshly cut grass, no more of those happy moments when, early in the morning, she would step outside to inhale the scent of the nighttime thunderstorm. Here was a different smell. It smelled of cars. There was a constant buzz, neighbors shouting. It was different. Years flew by unnoticed. Lorenza studied diligently, received a scholarship, passed all her exams, and finally got the high grade she deserved. But she had to combine studying with work, as she had to pay for the apartment herself. The longer Lorenza stayed in the city, the more she wanted to return home, where she could wake up again to the sound of mowing cows and do simple village tasks that always brought her joy. Life in the city turned out to be quite different from what she had imagined, but Lorenza didn't regret anything. She would receive the education and then return to the village, where she would work in her profession, benefiting her community. Lorenza went to visit her mother. Serafina, who had long accepted her daughter's choice, warmly welcomed her. They were sitting in the kitchen, chatting, and the smell of freshly baked pies filled the air. Lorenza looked around her mother's house, feeling a pleasant nostalgia. She wanted to stay here and not leave anywhere. It was amazing to spend the summer in the village. They had to work a lot, but there were also many happy activities. I was offered a job as a waitress at outdoor events for the summer. I agreed. I think it'll be fun. Besides, I need money now, and during the summer, you can earn a lot doing this, Lorenza said. That's good to hear. I'm very glad you've decided to come back to the village after you finish your studies. I think it's a great choice, especially since you're doing it from the heart. We lack veterinarians here. You'll have plenty of work, so you don't have to worry about that, Serafina said. Lorenza nodded but felt a sense of general disappointment. Maybe she shouldn't have left at all? Maybe she should have gone to study with the local veterinarian, got everything she needed, and then started working. Her mother had become quite thin and looked unhappy, and there was a melancholy in her eyes that spoiled her mood and aged her outwardly. Lorenza knew that her friend's fate had not turned out the best, and now she didn't even mention Lorenza returning to the village as soon as possible and staying there. So, is it not your cup of tea to live in the city? Very few villagers rush to the city and stay there, even after 5 years. Sooner or later, you want peace, rest, land, and pleasant fresh food, not the plastic tomatoes they sell in the stores. But I'm glad you tried. Although, who knows, maybe by the end of your studies, you'll change your mind again. I'm not holding out much hope, her mother said, shrugging. She remained silent as if harboring a terrible secret, occasionally glancing at her daughter, who immediately noticed the changes in her mother's behavior. When Serafina finally spoke, her daughter rolled her eyes. I was reading the cards. Troubles await you in the city. You won't listen to me now. You'll say it's all nonsense, but cards never lie, darling, Serafina said. Mom, for God's sake. What are you talking about? It's the 21st century, and you're reading these greasy cards and basing fate on them? Lorenza exclaimed indignantly, muttering to herself as she grabbed a tray. She didn't like it when her mother started reading cards again, hoping to persuade her daughter, so she would stay next to her mother. Go to Natalia, we'll talk later. Natalia isn't experiencing the best moments of her life. I feel sorry for her. The poor girl ruined her life, Serafina said. Lorenza just nodded, not wanting to reply. Her mother sat down at the table, once again spreading out the deck, while her daughter went outside and quickly headed to the large house, which was located almost on the outskirts of the village. Although over the years, several more construction sites had appeared here, apparently, soon this house would no longer be on the outskirts. Natalia was sitting on the veranda, talking to a little boy, repeating something, as if the baby could understand her. When Natalia looked up and saw her friend, she jumped in surprise and joy. She rushed down the steps, hugged her, held her close, and, crying, kept repeating how happy she was to see her. Lorenza, it's so good that you came. I missed you so much, I can't bear it. You're such a smart girl, Lorenza. It's good that you left everything behind and started a new life in the city. Now, even if you want to come back, you'll have an education, a job, and everything you want. I'm a fool, Lorenza, but but I can't go back now. I'll have to deal with the consequences, Natalia cried. Lorenza hugged her tightly, leading her out onto the veranda. The girl went to the kitchen, brought coffee, and placed it in front of the young mother on a neat round table, along which ran an ugly crack from a blow. Natalia simply nodded in gratitude, then looked into her friend's face. Look at how our lives have changed, Lorenza. We've been through so much together, but look how differently our lives have turned out. You're a smart girl, everything will be fine for you, you made the right choice, and I've been a fool, Lorenza. I can't come back now, and I'll have to deal with the consequences, Natalia said, sniffing and pressing her lips together to avoid crying. Lorenza looked at her friend and saw how her unhappy life had aged her. Even though Lorenza and Natalia were the same age, the latter looked about 6 years older. Her gaze was tormented and unhappy, she had gained significant extra weight, and her skin and teeth had deteriorated. Natalia found pregnancy very difficult, but she tried not to talk about it or think about it because nothing could be changed. My current husband has turned into an alcoholic. He doesn't care about me or the child. He only takes money, and sooner or later, he'll drink himself to death or drown somewhere when he goes fishing with his buddies. I should have listened to you and gone to study with you. I love my son. I've never loved anything in life as much as him. Oh, Lord, it's so hard to go through everything alone. And what about your mom? Lorenza asked. She said right away that, since I decided to get married, I should deal with the problems myself. I chose such a husband, so I should bear it. That's what my mom advised me. She doesn't want to deal with her grandson, doesn't want to help either, and keeps saying that I gave birth for myself, not for her. Why so? I spent all my childhood with my grandmother, and now grandmothers don't even want to look at their grandchildren. Even though they live just minutes away, Natalia murmured, soothing the baby and dozing her off in her arms. Lorenza felt a longing for the times when they were both young, unburdened by marriage or children. Natalia rushed into things. She wanted to get married, have a baby, and become a mother. Perhaps at those moments, she didn't consider how difficult it would be and how much effort a baby would require once it was born. Maybe you should move to the city? Come live with me. I rent an apartment, it's tiny, but we'll manage somehow. I'll help you take care of the baby, you can get a job, leave in the evening, and I'll go to school in the morning. Anything's better than staying here and looking at a drunken husband, Lorenza suggested. Natalia looked up at her, full of hope, but almost immediately she felt a sense of melancholy and realized that she would never leave. Natalia was afraid of her husband, of her mother's condemnation, and also afraid that she wouldn't cope, because even here, in the village, with a baby in her arms, it was difficult for her, and in the city, she might not cope at all. Lorenza returned to her mother's house, immersed in heavy thoughts about her friend, who stayed here alone with her problems, realizing that nobody else needed her troubles. Lorenza's heart squeezed with sadness, the feeling of longing becoming unbearable. Mom, did you read cards for Natalia? Lorenza asked when they were sitting at the table with her mother. Why do I need it? He seemed like a decent guy. He didn't drink and didn't get into fights, but then he started going downhill, got involved with Alejandro Cortez, and everything went bad real fast. Poor girl, she'll keep putting up with him until he drinks himself to death somewhere. You know, I look at Natalia and think, it's a good thing you went to the city after all. Maybe you avoided such a fate yourself, Serafina said, looking at her daughter. That evening, Lorenza was lying in bed, recalling her conversation with her friend and thinking about how nice it would have been if they had gone to the city together. The next day, Lorenza got on the bus and simply went back to the city, where her familiar life awaited her. She had to work again, study, and communicate with old and new acquaintances who would hardly ever become friends with her. In the city, the concept of friendship seemed to have a different meaning than in the village. Lorenza rested her head against the window, sitting in her tiny rental apartment, watching the children play, and enjoying the beautiful summer vacation. Tomorrow she would go to work again, listen to her boss's next tantrum, then return to her work duties. Lorenza took her boss's outbursts calmly, without any problems, because despite her harsh character, the woman faithfully paid the money and never once delayed the salary. During all this time, she could shout but calmly allow time off for a dentist appointment or anything else. She could create a fuss, but at the same time easily give a bonus or advance payment so that the employee could solve their financial problems. They feared her, respected her, and treated her understandingly because, behind the veil of a strict, tough woman, there was a warmly maternal heart. Lorenza returned to her work duties, and Miguel, a sly and repulsive guy whom she disliked from the moment they met, was constantly hovering around her. Miguel was generally disliked at work, suspicions about him varied, and newcomers were constantly warned not to deal with him. Rumor had it that Miguel was somehow related to the boss, which was why she tolerated all complaints against him and kept him in his position even though working with him was no picnic. Lorenza didn't like Miguel, but he took a liking to her, seizing every opportunity to flirt with her. Lorenza repeatedly rebuffed him, first politely, then rudely, and the last time they argued so fiercely that even other colleagues stood up for her. Miguel didn't back off. As soon as she appeared at work, he immediately started spewing nonsense, from compliments to insults, supposedly aimed at lowering her self-esteem. "You're doing the right thing by rejecting him," Ariel once commented, frowning as she glanced at the young man who was speaking rudely to someone on the phone. "He's shady, unreliable, and cunning. I can't stand such guys or such people in general. They annoy me. I still don't understand why nobody can fire him. We all complain, but he's still here," Lorenza concluded unpleasantly. "Where would he go? Do you think there are many people eager to take his place? Most students still depend on their parents, and an ordinary person won't work here for such a salary. So he stays because they can't fire him. There's no one to replace him. You should understand it," Ariel said, then shrugged as if imagining how much longer she would have to work side by side with Miguel. "Am I the first one he's hit on?" Lorenza asked. "Oh, Lorenza, it'd be easier to point out who he hasn't hit on. He's not particularly discerning. As soon as someone new shows up, he immediately switches his attention, as if he competes. And anyway, he's not a pleasant guy, even as a friend, let alone in a relationship. Don't even think about paying attention to him. Listen to my advice, don't even flirt with him, just shut him down bluntly, and that's it. We've heard rumors that last year he got a girl pregnant and dumped her, and now he doesn't even pay child support. So, to put it mildly, he's disgusting," Ariel summed up. Lorenza nodded, still watching the young man, who was actively gesturing while talking on the phone. She knew she couldn't let him get close to her, but for some reason, she had a gut-wrenching feeling that their paths would cross again, even against her will. The manager called Lorenza in. The girl quickly got up, adjusted her apron, and headed to the office of the restaurant director, who now also dealt with off-site events. The woman was sitting at the table, filling out papers, and gestured towards the chair. Lorenza sat down there. "Lorenza, tell me, do you have a man?" the manager asked. The question was so unexpected that Lorenza was momentarily stunned. She stared at the manager, who burst into laughter, tears welling up in her eyes. "I just want to protect you. I see Miguel hitting on you. Maybe you date someone else. I won't have anyone to replace you. I don't want to find out later that you've gotten knocked up, and I urgently need to find a replacement for you. I've already talked to all the girls, now it's your turn. What are the chances that you'll get pregnant?" "0, Leonila," Lorenza said and stared at the manager, who didn't mince words. "I doubt it, of course. I don't have anyone. That idiot Miguel, I've rejected him 10 times already, but he keeps following me around like a fool. I don't have anyone, and I'm not planning to look for anyone in the summer. I need to earn money to pay for my apartment, not to date men," Lorenza honestly reported. Leonila Santos squinted, looked closely at the girl, and then nodded. "You're really something, Lorenza. At your age, my parents provided for me, and then I got married and relied on my husband. When we divorced, I was already 30, and I had no idea how to live on my own. It was hard to get used to, especially at that age when it seems like everyone around you owes you something. And since you've been independent since a young age, it'll be easier for you to adapt later in life. You know, life is much harder than when you were in school or university. There are a lot more problems in real life than it seems at first glance. But you're a tough girl, you'll manage. Look, we have a grand wedding on a riverboat coming up soon. I want you to go. I'm counting on you. You're doing great. There were never any complaints about you, everyone is satisfied. Leonila got up, went to a small table, poured herself a large cup of coffee, and then returned to her desk. She lit a cigarette, looked at her protege, and just nodded as if answering an unspoken question. A local rich guy is marrying off his son, and I took this job, but I already regret it. Everything has to be perfect. It's not like some corporate banquet. So I'm counting on you to make sure everything goes smoothly. Don't let me down, Lorenza, at least you, Leonila grumbled. Lorenza left the office. She looked focused. This conversation left her with a bitter taste simmering somewhere in her chest. There would be several off-site events ahead, including the wedding on the riverboat. The manager was going crazy over this wedding, lecturing them almost every day, saying they wouldn't get away with anything and that if there were any incidents, she would leave everyone without pay. Lorenza decided to visit her mother in the village because she wouldn't be able to go for a while. There were too many events that she had to work on. In her free time, she wanted to sleep as much as possible and prepare for the upcoming year at the university. Her mother welcomed Lorenza better than last time. Her cheeks blushed, she had gained a little weight, but overall she was recovering. Lorenza was most afraid that her mother was sick but refused to admit it to her daughter, so as not to worry her unnecessarily. I don't like that Miguel will be on the boat. You should be more careful with him, there's no smoke without fire, dear. In such cases, you should listen to people's warnings, her mother said. Lorenza nodded, but she knew that even without her mother's advice. Unlike others, she didn't attach any importance to Miguel. He was just an overconfident guy who was out of line, but he was unlikely to be capable of any malice or deceit. Lorenza did the usual village chores that she missed so much. She increasingly thought that moving to the city was a mistake. Surely, even education wouldn't bring her as much joy as her previous carefree life did. Compared to the hustle and bustle of the city, which brought no results, the calm and measured village life, where she did everything for herself, not for some authority, seemed truly heavenly. Lorenza spent several days in the village. It was time to return because she had work and the long-awaited event on the boat, which her boss was already going crazy about. Natalia took it upon herself to see Lorenza off since her mother, after embracing her tightly, left for work, unable to wait for her departure. Natalia walked alongside, pushing the stroller, looking at her friend with undisguised envy. It's so strange, we've lived together for many years, we're almost like sisters. We went to the same kindergarten and the same school, studied, and got into trouble together. Remember when we fell into the river and the local boys rescued us and didn't tell our mothers? Natalia asked. They remembered that incident and laughed, although at the time it seemed scary. They could have drowned in the fast river if the brave boys hadn't rushed to help them. The high school students rescued the girls and, after taking their promise not to approach the river again, said nothing to their mothers, well aware of what they were like at their age. These childhood memories squeezed Lorenza's heart because she knew she would hardly ever return to those places, as a large resort had been built there. It was a wonderful time when the city had not yet encroached on the village territories, and they could wander and roam wherever they pleased without fear of stumbling upon yet another construction site, leaving behind endless amounts of garbage. Sometimes I wonder how my life would have turned out if I had gone with you to study. Probably now I would be getting an education, going with you to off-site events to earn extra money, and in the evenings, we would watch movies, play computer games, stroll around the city, and not worry about anything, Natalia said. When you left, I thought you were a fool because leaving the village and family life just to realize yourself in the city seemed like sheer madness to me. I judged you so harshly, maybe I envied you even then, and now I understand completely that you did the right thing. You're the only one from our class who made the right choice. If you ever want to come back to the village, you'll be welcomed with open arms, while I'm stuck in the same old routine now." Lorenza hugged her friend tightly, feeling deeply sorry for her. The situation in her life was escalating, more and more problems arose, and her husband showed fewer signs of sobriety. Natalia had given up hope of her family life becoming somewhat normal. At first, she thought her husband would quit drinking once he found a job, but he promised to quit when the baby was born. But now he had lost his job and they had a child, yet his harmful habit proved to be much stronger than the endless promises he was ready to make. If at first Natalia believed him, now she let his promises slip through her fingers, waiting for the moment when the child would grow up a little and she could go back to work, leaving her fiancé alone to deal with his harmful habit. Natalia didn't share her plans with anyone because she didn't know if it was possible. The summer in the village was truly beautiful. Beautiful golden fields stretched everywhere, and lush green trees leaned down to the river, touching the water with delicate petals. Somewhere in the distance, the rumble of a bus was heard. Lorenza still hugged her friend, who cried quietly, unwilling to let her go. For Natalia, Lorenza was the only person who supported her. There was also Serafina. She helped with the child and supported Natalia, but she couldn't resist giving advice. Lorenza hugged Natalia one last time, then boarded the bus, leaving behind only a faint scent of perfume, which seemed out of place among the rural aromas. Lorenza waved her hand to her friend, feeling a heart-wrenching longing filling her from within. The bus started moving, not leaving the dust behind, as it rained and everything was on the ground. Lorenza was sitting, occasionally looking around. The bus was almost empty. No one was going to the city in the summer, especially at such a time. As soon as Lorenza got off the bus, she immediately saw her colleague. Ariel exclaimed in surprise and immediately rushed to hug her, which Lorenza didn't quite understand. They only communicated at work, and even then, only on work-related matters, sometimes exchanging gossip, but that was it. And Ariel behaved as if they were close friends who had known each other for 10 years, if not more. "Lorenza, guess what? Miguel is in trouble. They say he took money from one of our clients, and now everyone is investigating. I hope they won't let him go to the wedding because of this," Ariel said with a satisfied voice, smiling broadly. "It's such a serious event, and she wants this fool to go with us as if there are no more people. Damn, Lorenza, I don't want him to come with us. I'm not a superstitious person, but even I feel like this will end badly." Lorenza also felt that this situation with Miguel would end badly, but whether they would let him go or not was out of their control. Besides, Lorenza knew perfectly well that even if the situation were confirmed, Miguel would still go with them to the largest off-site event because they didn't have enough people. Even with such great personnel on board, it would be catastrophically insufficient, considering the number of people they would have to serve. Lorenza arrived home with an unpleasant feeling, as if she were being deceived or deliberately set up. Maybe her mother was right, she shouldn't have paid attention to that guy in the first place. However, she needed to stay alert because the situation could turn out to be very unpleasant. If the guy was suspected of theft, there was likely some truth to it. And most likely, he might try to do it again. They worked as a close-knit team, and where one was accused, the rest were likely to be implicated as well. When Lorenza arrived at the restaurant, she immediately took her place by the counter to prepare breakfast for the business people who came in right after their morning meetings. Lorenza heard shouting, banging on the table, and endless indignation coming from the manager's office. She was sure that most likely, the manager was reprimanding the careless young man who had caused trouble, and now Leonila and her staff had to deal with the consequences. Once breakfast was served, a thin, pale-faced waitress replaced Lorenza, and she was summoned to the manager's office. When Lorenza entered, everyone who worked at the off-site events was already there, along with the angry manager. "All right, we have a serious event coming up. I hope you're smart enough not to mess up, or else I'll leave you all without the salary, and you'll have to deal with the consequences yourselves. I told you all from the beginning that if one messes up, you'll all have to deal with it," Leonila said, snorting with malice. She crossed her arms over her chest and began arranging photos of how the table would be set, what emphasis needed to be made, what dishes would be served, and how they would be presented. Leonila outlined the order of serving dishes, dessert trays, and the schedule. The grand wedding had to go perfectly, so the preparation took up a lot of time. Lorenza was already disillusioned with her new job and regretted going to serve at off-site events. She should have just stayed at the restaurant. She would have earned less money over the summer, but she would have had far fewer problems. Leonila continued to explain how the event would be organized, what to pay attention to, and where not to mess up. Lorenza listened, occasionally glancing at Ariel, who sometimes squinted her eyes and chuckled while standing next to one of the new girls, who seemed hesitant about going on the boat. During her time at work, Lorenza had learned to understand people quickly and could immediately tell who was there temporarily and who would stay permanently. All right, the son of the wealthy man will get married. The boy is a bit strange, to be honest. He's well known in our circles for his love of heavy drinking and partying, leaving his daddy to cover up all his mistakes with money. The bride, as far as I know, is quite a popular blogger. So, if anything happens, she'll quickly spread the word. The guests they invite to the wedding will likely record everything on their phones. Please watch your behavior and speech. Don't smoke in public places. Don't even sit down to eat. Move like robots, and try not to attract any attention to yourselves. I'm paying you a lot of money for this event, so please take this responsibility seriously, Leonila said. Lorenza felt that the manager wasn't just anxious, she was trembling, completely confused. She was extremely nervous, and her teeth were chattering from heightened anxiety. The woman made a small bow in jest and then continued to lecture the young team. Tomorrow at 5 a.m., we will pick you up from here. If anyone is late, they'll have to go on their own and pay for it. And if you won't tell me anything and then decide not to board the ship, you will receive a personal gift from me in the form of a dismissal with terrible recommendations. If you think I'm joking here, you're mistaken. That's it, you can go home and rest, but don't get drunk. Tomorrow morning, I expect everyone to be in their places, the woman said. The group began to leave. Lorenza pondered that they just needed to get through this. Soon the event would be over, and it would be back to the usual banquets. Everything would return to normal. Lorenza woke up to the alarm, which had been going off repeatedly. She hadn't slept well. There was a burning sensation in her eyes. Lately, sleep had been elusive, with constant nightmares, as if warning her that a series of unpleasant events was about to begin and she would have to face them alone. Lorenza went to the kitchen, put the kettle on to make coffee, and contemplated that she would have to go to another event where guests would treat her like their servant. The richer the event, the more disgusting people behaved. It was becoming a pattern. It felt as if having money gave them the right to mistreat others, asserting themselves at their expense. Lorenza looked out the window. It was drizzling, which, according to the forecast, should end soon. After drinking her coffee and having a sandwich with butter and cheese, Lorenza went downstairs. She hurried to the bus stop, almost immediately hopping onto the nearly empty, earliest route, and then fought off the encroaching sleepiness. When Lorenza arrived near the restaurant, several guys were already standing there, looking just as miserable and sleepy as she felt. They sat down on a long sofa on the cafe's veranda, chatting and trying to cheer each other up. By the end of summer, they were all quite tired and waiting for the college year to start, so that they would have the standard shifts in the restaurant, and there would be no more boats, other restaurants, or food courts. Finally, a few cars pulled up. Lorenza took her place and almost immediately fell asleep next to Ariel. When they approached the huge ship, it turned out to be unusually bulky and clumsy, but richly decorated. Lorenza even doubted that such a ship would sail at all, let alone with a decent number of guests on board. While nobody was there yet, the serving staff had enough time to inspect everything, rehearse the presentation of special dishes and the cake, and then hide in the kitchen, waiting for the banquet to begin. Lorenza was in charge of appetizers and alcohol. She had to stand at the buffet for a while, then she would have other duties. She least wanted to carry out the cake at the most critical moment. And they chose the scapegoat by drawing lots. When Lorenza pulled out the long stick, she couldn't be happier that this task had passed her by. Soon, a lot of people came, and they quickly began to feast at the buffet. Ariel, eager to support her familiar colleague, was standing next to the neighboring table, immediately filling the empty seats, making new platters, forming mini burgers, and other delicacies. "Have you seen the lovebirds?" Ariel asked, chuckling to herself. "No, I haven't even stepped out of here yet. I'm going crazy because of all these people. I didn't think there would be so much food at the buffet. Usually, buffets are the simplest places. What will be next, then?" Ariel sighed, shook her head, and then smiled again when she saw guests approaching. Lorenza filled glasses with cold drinks, smiling as she served guests. Although she didn't want to, they looked at her like she was second-rate. It irritated her. She wanted to put all these people in their place. Although maybe in their eyes, she really was second-rate, just a waitress capable only of serving food. The groom is kind of sketchy, chubby, with a crooked mustache sticking out. He's, mommy's boy, as they say about guys like that. Most likely, mommy is in charge there, and now the wife will be in her place, Ariel said as soon as the guests left. "Oh, come on. Maybe you got the wrong first impression." "Me? Wrong? Lorenza, I've been dealing and working with people for too long. Trust my experience, he's definitely mommy's boy. Such guys run after mommy and do everything she says. He doesn't have his own opinion at all, only mommy's opinion matters to him, and that's it. A marriage with such a guy is doomed, believe me. Either the bride doesn't realize it or everything suits her, considering how much money he has. Did you see the cake they brought? Oh my God, one cake probably costs as much as my car. Where do people get such money from? Don't tell me they earned it honestly." Ariel vented her frustration in between guests approaching the buffet. Soon the table emptied, and the waitstaff calmly returned to their places, preparing for the big banquet. The dishes were ready, and the main dishes would soon need to be served. The host was walking around the ship entertaining the guests. There were beautiful mirrored people in bunny suits with ears, attracting guests for photo shoots. The wind messed up several photo zones, so they were gradually losing their former appeal. Guests were drinking more and more, and unpleasant situations arose more and more frequently. Someone started a fight, and a serious conflict broke out. The host soaked up, darted from one end of the ship to the other, and then descended from the nose to the bottom. He tried to resolve the conflicts, but it was evident that it wasn't. He would have been better off organizing a couple of ordinary weddings and returning to his previous life without any problems. But then an acute situation arose. Ariel had seen that a sneaky waiter was running around with someone else's wallet and immediately understood that a scandal was about to start. When she rushed to him, Miguel vanished, leaving behind only the smell of cheap men's cologne. The theft came to light almost instantly. A monstrous scandal ensued, and for some unknown reason, poor Lorenza was charged with everything, but she just happened to be there at the time. The drunken rich man turned crazy as he drank too much alcohol. He attacked the poor, frightened waitress and began shaking her like a plastic doll. Such shouting and chaos ensued that no one could make out anything, but even the guests stood up for the poor waitress, who looked at the rich man with crazy, frightened eyes, fearing that he would throw her overboard. And then Marco Perez tore the sleeve of her shirt. There was a strange birthmark on her entire shoulder, reminiscent of a sinuous snake with a faded pattern on its back. The rich man froze for a moment, and silence fell. He looked at her, glanced at those around him, and couldn't believe what he saw. Marco shuddered, and some woman immediately jumped up, grabbed him, quickly led him aside, and whispered to the waitress to hide until the man sobbed up. Lorenza, with wobbly legs, ran to the kitchen and cried her eyes out, unable to calm down. She was terrified. Lorenza had to pull herself together as they were catastrophically short-staffed. The wallet suddenly turned up in the rich man's cabin. The case was hushed up. Marco apologized to the girl in front of everyone, and they had to continue working, even though she would have preferred to be anywhere else but on this damn ship right now. The event continued on its course, but not without hitches. An elderly woman took Lorenza by the arm and led her somewhere down the long corridor. Don't be too upset with him. When he's drunk, he can't control himself at all. Don't talk too much. The journalists will interview you now, give you a minute of fame, and then make you the scapegoat, the elderly woman said, smiling as warmly as possible to demonstrate her kindness, although she just wanted to shield their entire company from the active pressure from the journalists. I wasn't planning to. Do you think I haven't seen drunk people at our events? The main thing is that we sorted it out. He apologized. That's all, the rest doesn't concern me. It's my job, Lorenza said. Good girl. Professional approach. I'll put in a good word for you with your boss. You might even become a manager someday. All right, get back to work. I won't distract you. I'll scold him later, when he's completely sober. Don't worry about that. They got their wealth in a flash and don't know where the money comes from. That's why they behave like monsters. The elderly woman disappeared, leaving Lorenza alone with her thoughts. The grand event gradually came to an end. The ship returned to where it had departed. The completely intoxicated crowd, swaying slowly, descended to reach the transfer cars and taxis. Lorenza felt long-awaited happiness and monstrous fatigue. Meanwhile, Marco, that same rich man who married off his son, was standing in the hall by the railing, watching the girl. He couldn't believe it was a message from his distant and very unpleasant past, where he had done so much that he probably wouldn't be able to clean up in a lifetime. Marco looked at the girl. She was laughing and chatting with her colleagues, waiting for a taxi. How much she resembled her. There was no doubt that the birthmark belonged to her. Marco got into the car and soon was on his way home, where he would get a good night's sleep, and the next day he would talk to his friend, the only one in his circle who could listen without judgment. Marco knew without other people's opinions that he had behaved atrociously in the past, but he didn't want anyone to say it again, like he was a guilty kitten. Timoteo Ramos arrived only at noon. By that time, Marco was already on edge, nervously glancing out the window as if it could hasten his friend's arrival. What's the rush so early in the morning? Timoteo grumbled, yawning heartily, eloquently indicating that he hadn't slept properly yet. You still haven't slept. I thought you'd come and crash right into bed, Marco replied. And I thought you wouldn't be drinking so much, even at your son's wedding, that you'd attack a poor waitress. I can't believe it, Marco. You embarrassed yourself. Do you even realize how the journalists can spin this now? Marco rolled his eyes demonstratively, prompting his friend to laugh immediately, knowing how he disliked being chastised for his actions. Come on in, we need to talk. I've realized something. Remember when I grabbed her sleeve and tore it off? She has a birthmark, just like that woman, the one eye. Marco fell silent. Timoteo finally understood that the situation was clearly not funny, but tensed up. In his memory, Marco only behaved like this in very tense situations. Marco sighed heavily, sat down at the table, and poured himself a large cup of coffee, hoping that it would give him courage and a bit of alertness, as he hadn't slept properly and was lost in thought about what had happened. I got married when I was young. You were abroad then, still laughing at me, saying that at my age I should only be having fun with girls, but I decided to take my life seriously. I remember, I'd say the same thing now. Do you think she might show up? You told me back then that you'd sorted everything out, remained friends, parted ways, and forgotten each other's names. I even supported you back then. I remember being glad she didn't try to claim your money. I warned you she'd cling to you, but you didn't listen to anyone, Timoteo said, unable to contain himself. Marco fell silent, waiting for his friend to finally stop talking. I loved my wife very much. I loved her so much that she even appeared in my dreams while sleeping next to me. I was afraid to lose her. I didn't let her out of my sight. I would have tied her to the radiator, I swear, so she wouldn't go outside and no one would look at her. I know, I was an idiot, but I was young and foolish. Anyway, now Timoteo finally began to understand that the situation was much worse than he had initially thought. He didn't interrupt his friend anymore, allowing him to speak. We had a daughter back then. I didn't even have time to tell you. We argued constantly, and there were always some misunderstandings. It was very hard for her because I controlled her. I had fits of jealousy, and I admit, I even raised my hand, jealous to the point of madness. She took our little daughter and disappeared overnight. A few days later, I received a letter from a lawyer, and 2 months later, we were divorced. That's the whole story. The only thing is that the birthmark on the girl was in the form of a snake with a pattern, just like a winding ribbon with a head, the same as her mother's. When the girl was born, I laughed, saying their birthmarks were printed. Marco buried his head in his palms and felt like a complete idiot. He had no strength left. He felt dizzy after he admitted everything, and all his limbs felt heavy, as if filled with liquid metal. Marco hoped he would never have to share his vile deed and the fact that he had forced a young woman with a child in her arms to run off without any money to escape from the ubiquitous tyrant who wouldn't let her live. Marco was staring ahead, still unsure of what to do next. You need to find this girl and figure out what's going on with her, find out where she lives, and find out about her parents. Just find out where she is, and then come and see for yourself. Maybe you'll even get to see your wife and apologize. That's it. Marco, I never would have thought you were capable of something like this, Timoteo grumbled. I wouldn't have thought so myself. I loved her so much that I lost my mind. Now I remember my behavior and can't believe I did that. I could have had a normal life now, a good wife, a beloved daughter, but now I only have a wife with her tantrums and an illegitimate son, for whom I'm just a walking wallet, Marco said with undisguised bitterness in his voice. No use grinding over the past now. What does it matter how things could have been if the past can't be undone? Come on, Marco, pull yourself together. You're a grown man after all. It's time to take responsibility for your actions. Call Daniel Molina and let him find out the information. He'll do everything for the investigation, you know. If he can't find anything, no one else will. Marco agreed with this statement, but still felt guilty for some reason, even though many years had passed since then. As soon as his friend left, Marco immediately called and briefly relayed who needed to be found, but naturally didn't tell the whole story. Daniel never asked unnecessary questions, took the money, and searched for the right people. If he couldn't find anything, it was useless to turn to any other private investigator. Over the next few days, while Marco had been waiting for information, he went crazy. He couldn't even work, constantly lost in thoughts about his past and realizing that he would have to rebuild his relationship with his daughter from scratch if it was indeed her. Although it was unlikely someone of her age could have the same birthmark. Daniel called late in the evening, gave the address, received payment for his work, told Marco who the girl was living with and what she was doing now, and then disappeared, as always, without asking unnecessary questions or telling anyone about his investigation. Marco couldn't bear it. He went to the village the next day. His large, snow-white Jeep, swaying like a caterpillar from side to side, navigated the bumpy road. When he finally stopped, he sighed, looking at the large, sturdy village house. When Serafina came out, the man immediately realized that she wasn't his ex-wife. Olivia looked completely different, but there was something similar in their eyes. But Serafina recognized the man right away. A look of steady disappointment appeared in her eyes at his arrival. "We need to talk. I assume, judging by your look, you know me well. Olivia married you, bore your child, and then ran away, just to get as far away as possible from the person who suffocated her with his control," Serafina blurted out in one breath. "Is she home? If you've come in. There's no need for the neighbors to have new topics for gossip," Serafina said, then entered the house, leaving the door open. For a moment, Marco froze, as if he didn't know whether to enter or not, but a minute later, he stepped inside, surveying everything around him. The house was simple and cozy, but he noticed that money was scarce in this family. Serafina put on the kettle, placed a dish of sweets on the table, and then sat down, not taking her eyes off the man who was objectively unpleasant to her. "Olivia has been gone for a long time now. She died. She got seriously ill and passed away in a matter of months. We had a big fight by then because of you. I warned her that this control was abnormal and that after the birth of the child, you would become even worse. We argued so much back then that we stopped talking, even though we're sisters. And then he remembered his wife's sister, whom he had seen only a few times. Serafina had aged significantly, as she was already older than her sister, and now so many years had passed. Olivia moved in with you then, and I stayed at our mother's house, taking care of her. Then my mother died. Olivia ran away, hiding somewhere. She came to me once, ate in a hurry, and then ran away. She was afraid you'd come here and start searching from here. She ran away, and then I heard from third parties that Olivia died and that she didn't have much time left when she found out her diagnosis, Serafina said. Deep sorrow was evident on the woman's face. A long vertical wrinkle between her eyebrows made her look even older. Serafina leaned back in her chair, and it creaked treacherously. Then the guardianship authorities came to me and said they would take the girl to the orphanage if no one took guardianship of her. Of course, I couldn't leave my niece at the orphanage, but by then I was so tired. I remember I went to get her. She was crying and calling for her mom. My heart was breaking, but I was afraid I wouldn't be able to raise her myself. But they still took her, right? I don't want to take this sin to my grave. I didn't take her. I hugged her, cried, and apologized, but I didn't take her. Mom had just died. There was hardly any money, and the house was falling apart. There was no one to fix it. I didn't have a decent job back then, and I was grieving my sister's loss so much. But when I got home, I realized I couldn't live without her. 2 days later, I went back and got her. That's how we started living together. She's your daughter, there's no doubt about it. Unfortunately, she even looks like you. Luckily, only in facial features, not in character, but she did inherit the birthmark, the same snake on her shoulder. No need to have a tattoo, Serafina waved off. It was difficult for her to talk about the past. There was a lump in her throat. It was growing, hindering her speech and plunging her into memories that were becoming increasingly heavy. He felt guilty because everything happened solely because of him. Why hadn't he looked for his wife? Why hadn't he traveled around the local villages, hoping to find her? He was young and stupid. His ego told him that if she ran away, then she must have been with some guy. Probably, she was cheating on him before that. Marco felt ashamed of how he had thought about his late wife, and he thought that he could have cured her illness. After all, there was plenty of money, and they could even afford treatment abroad. But because of his control, he left her with nothing. The poor woman probably blamed him until the end of her days. Suddenly, the door opened, and Lorenza walked in. She was stunned, as it was all unexpected. She was looking from Marco to her mother, not understanding what was happening at all. Serafina, taking a deep breath and gathering all the remnants of courage, told the girl everything, trying to avoid sharp edges, as the girl shouldn't have known all the details. Besides, it would be better for Lorenza's memory of her father if she smoothed out the situation a bit. When Lorenza heard that she wasn't her mother and that the rich man who had been shaking her like a plastic doll was her father, she was shocked and speechless. Lorenza and Marco were left alone, talking for a long time and trying to understand how to proceed now that they had found each other. He left her money, promised to be involved in her life, and kept his word. It wasn't long before Marco invited his daughter to meet his wife and son. Santiago was not his biological son. Marco had married a woman with a child, and although they were living comfortably, they were clearly not thrilled that a blood relative had suddenly appeared. Eleonora, Marco's wife, and his son Santiago were not eager to interact with the newfound relative. Lorenza herself wasn't particularly inclined to socialize with them either. They were too different, with different outlooks on life. Lorenza continued her studies at the university, working as a waitress, despite the fact that she had enough money now. Her newfound father helped her financially and was willing to do anything to rebuild their relationship. Back at Serafina's house, Marco practically begged his daughter to forgive him, and the girl decided not to torment the elderly man, who had no idea that his daughter had been living nearby all this time. It was quite difficult to restore their relationship, but Lorenza tried to be understanding towards her father, who had no idea how to communicate with an adult girl. Meanwhile, Eleonora couldn't find her place. She was deeply troubled by the fact that his blood daughter had appeared and now felt that her relationship with her husband was significantly strained. Against the backdrop of her calm daughter, Eleonora looked agitated and overly eager for money. Santiago, we need to do something urgently while it's still possible. If this girl gets Marco's attention now, we'll be left with nothing, Eleonora snapped rudely, glancing at her son. Santiago held a tablet in his hands, playing some casual games and ignoring his mother's words. Mom, come on, a girl showed up, and that's it, they hardly talk anyway. How do you know if they talk or not? Santiago, put away your damn tablet before I throw it out the window, the woman snapped, not even knowing how to talk to her son anymore, who deliberately ignored her. Santiago, you're still young, you don't know how everything works in this life. If she does everything right, trust me, we'll be left with nothing. She looks like a simple village girl, but in reality, she'll quickly put us in our place. Do you think Marco will want to leave his inheritance to a guy who isn't even his son? Or leave the inheritance to his real blood daughter? Now Santiago was silently looking at his mother. Eleonora grimaced, sat on a tall bar stool, and poured herself wine into a round glass. She rested her palm on her forehead, rubbed her temples, and then stared back at her son, who was listening to her. If we don't do something now, we'll be left without money. Men are always fickle. Today he loves us, and tomorrow he'll run off, find himself a younger chick, and leave the inheritance to his real daughter. God, she'll even have the legal right to claim everything, and we'll be left with nothing, Eleonora cut in rudely. The situation made her feel angry, and she couldn't sit still. Taking her glass, the woman started pacing around the living room, measuring it with her steps. Santiago, let's come up with something. Remember the guy who stole money at the wedding? Maybe you can strike a deal with him? We'll arrange some event, like a banquet. Let him hit her over the head with something, and she'll fall overboard. Remember, your wife is pregnant. You'll need money now more than ever. Or do you want to work for someone, living paycheck to paycheck? Eleonora insisted. The woman knew exactly which painful points to press. Santiago immediately got nervous, imagining life without his stepfather's money. Disgusting images of a joyless future flashed before him, where he worked in a factory, his wife nagging him in the evenings, throwing tantrums over lack of money, and he wouldn't be able to do anything about it because he was too tired after work. Then they would have a child, need even more money, and God forbid if his wife got pregnant again. Eleonora saw from her son's expression that she had finally managed to convey the essence of the problem to him. And if someone finds out, you'll walk away clean, and I'll be the one who gets caught. Eleonora rolled her eyes, listening to her son's accusations. She grimaced and looked at him with displeasure, thinking that she shouldn't have allowed this damn acquaintance with her daughter from the very beginning. If her husband had told her earlier, she wouldn't have let him go to the village. If someone does find out, no one will blame you. What does it have to do with you? They'll blame the one who hit her over the head. And you're related to her, so there won't be any accusations against you. Offer that guy more money, let him live quietly until he gets caught himself, Eleonora waved off. She was never interested in other people's lives or the consequences of her own decisions. The main thing was to achieve her goal, she didn't care about anything else. Just as long as it didn't concern her. Meanwhile, her son was mentally running through all the details of the upcoming crime, seeing no reason why he would be accused. Maybe it was indeed worth the risk. Santiago, you won't have a car, you won't have an apartment, and your child will grow up just like you did before I married this man. You can't earn anything honestly in this life, but now you have a chance to be in good standing, to have money and a wife, and to not worry about the problems that await you shortly. Think carefully and don't do anything foolish, Eleonora concluded, then walked towards the staircase leading to the second floor. The woman looked tired from her thoughts. However, now even Santiago couldn't pick up his tablet or play games because all his thoughts were focused solely on the upcoming event. On the same day, Eleonora called the same restaurant. She ordered the event and asked for the same girl who supposedly handled the problematic situation wonderfully, and now they wanted to offer her more work. By that time, Lorenza had stopped engaging in outdoor events, devoting all her free time to studying. But her boss persuaded her without revealing that they had paid double for her. Leonila didn't even suspect what all this was for. By this point, the rich man's son had already made a deal with Miguel, who readily agreed to do everything for a sum of money. Not only would he make money, but he would also get revenge on the girl who had brazenly ignored him. The rich man's son knew who had stolen the wallet back then, but he didn't care if an innocent person was blamed. And now he could blackmail this sneak who was unhappy with the presence of a witness. Santiago was so scared of getting nothing that he decided it was better to take the risk now than to end up with empty pockets later. When Miguel boarded the ship, he was ready to do everything as they had agreed, and when he was alone with the girl, he hit her over the head with a bottle. As the man turned the girl towards him to throw her overboard, she saw his eyes. Terrified, Miguel flinched. She had seen him. In a panic, Miguel threw her overboard, hoping the girl would drown and everything would be as planned. "Is it done?" Santiago asked when he was alone with Miguel. "Everything's done as we agreed," Miguel grumbled under his breath, deciding not to mention that the girl he threw overboard was still conscious. Miguel was confident she would hit the water and then drown, unable to find the strength to reach the shore. "Let's get off the ship, and I'll give you the rest of the money." "That's it. It's good when everything ends well. Right? It's interesting, of course, but my life turned into a circus when this girl appeared," Miguel said. Miguel got to work, trying to forget the girl's frightened, wild eyes as she was falling overboard, staring right into his face. Miguel was sure that even when he lay down to sleep, he would see that horror in her eyes and trembling lips. Lorenza quickly lost her remaining strength. She thrashed in the water, feeling a hot pain spreading somewhere in the back of her head. Nausea crept up, and an incredible weakness became more and more significant. Lorenza remembered the moment her arms gave out. Beyond that, Lorenza remembered nothing. Meanwhile, a young fisherman who came to the river saw the body. The girl floated in the water, strangely bent, her face turned to the sky. The boy was so scared that he didn't even have time to think. He immediately dashed straight into the water. Within a second, he had pulled her onto the shore and began performing CPR. Coughing up water, the girl choked, breathed, and then immediately blacked out. Marcelo scooped her up, carried her in his arms, and then brought her home. He laid her on the bed and wrapped her warmly in a blanket to finally warm her up after the icy river water. Lorenza was burning up, her temperature was soaring, and there was a fear that she wouldn't recover. Marcelo was sitting in a chair, occasionally entering the bedroom to check her temperature. If the girl had been in the water, it could mean anything if he reported it to the police. What if they shouldn't have found her? But while flipping through channels, Marcelo froze. He saw on the news that the girl was being sought after. Local businessman Marco Perez, almost in tears, said he was looking for her and was willing to pay for any information. Marcelo thought long and hard but ultimately decided to call the number. He introduced himself, mentioned the village he lived in, and then said that the girl was very unwell. Marco promised to come within hours, flying on the way just to get to his daughter as soon as possible. He could hardly believe she was alive, as the situation was now clearly going to have criminal consequences. Marco couldn't hide that his wife and son were extremely nervous upon learning the girl was alive. Eleonora glared at Santiago, almost cursing him with her eyes alone. Marco decided to get to the bottom of this, but for now, he needed to save his daughter, take her to the hospital, and put everything in order. Meanwhile, Lorenza regained consciousness but struggled to remember the details of her past life. It felt as though she had completely forgotten everything about the shock and stress. And when her father arrived at dawn, falling to his knees in tears and begging for forgiveness, she remembered everything. Lorenza told him who had hit her on the head. She also remembered seeing Marco's son on the ship. Even before leaving, Marco immediately called an old friend at the police station and told him something strange was going on there. Meanwhile, Lorenza's condition worsened, with her temperature rising exponentially. Marco took the boy's phone number, then quickly went outside and loaded the girl onto the back seat, carefully securing her in a lying position. He was riding very fast, fearing it would be too late. They needed to get her to the hospital urgently before the situation got even worse. Lorenza remembered lying in the back seat of the car, feeling like everything would soon be over, and then suddenly a white corridor, doctors, and people who kept reassuring her that everything would be fine and that she shouldn't have worried. Lorenza quickly found herself in a room that seemed overly fancy, especially considering they were in a hospital. Apparently, rich people had their rooms. When the doctor arrived, Lorenza was gradually coming to her senses. The fever subsided, for bags towered on metal stands nearby. The doctor took her temperature, said everything turned out okay, and it could have been much worse than it already was. They advised her to stay under the doctor's supervision for a few days. And only 4 days later, Lorenza was finally discharged from the hospital and immediately went to her mother's. Despite knowing the truth about Serafina, she remained her mother. Initiating legal proceedings, Marco didn't even expect the horrifying truth to come to light. The waiter was caught almost immediately. He confessed that it was all the rich man's son's idea. And when the police began unraveling the situation, it turned out to be much worse. It appeared that Eleonora had initially planned everything in a way to make the son guilty. Then she would have remained the sole heiress and, after poisoning her husband, would have been left with the business and money without any problems. Despite well-planned actions, everything didn't go according to plan. The woman received a suspended sentence because she hadn't managed to do anything and could have changed her mind. The man was unhappy that the sentence was suspended but signed an unofficial pact with the woman. Eleonora would take the apartment and beauty salon he had given her and then disappear from his life forever. This option suited them both. Meanwhile, Lorenza lost all sense of continuing her studies but persisted nonetheless, planning to become a good professional and return to the village. As her mother warned, city life turned out to be a real nightmare, where problems only grew despite having money, now supplied by her father. By the way, the man felt guilty and tried to make amends. Lorenza didn't blame him. After all, he couldn't control everything in the world. Now, almost every weekend, Lorenza visited her mother, then returned to college, and counted the months until she would be back in the village, where there would be no such problems or constant pressure. Lorenza wanted to return to the place where she was loved and accepted unconditionally, where everything was just like in her childhood, where there was peace, fresh air in the mornings, and a wonderful life surrounded by animals she adored. She finished her studies. She received her diploma and returned to the village, but first, Lorenza went to the small village where she was saved. She maintained communication with the fisherman who pulled her out of the water. They quickly started a relationship. He visited her in the city, and she visited him in the village. Now Lorenza came to take the fisherman back to her village. Marcello lived in an almost abandoned village. There were very few people left. Lorenza and her mother lived in a good, bustling village with plenty of people and work. Marco renovated Serafina's house and also bought a house for his daughter. "If I had known so much would happen to you, I would have locked you in the basement, I swear," Serafina said when they were all together in a big group, sitting in the gazebo in the garden. The blooming apple tree dropped pink petals onto the table, and there was a wonderful scent that could only be felt in the village. Lorenza terribly missed those beautiful moments. Lorenza didn't just live with her husband in the village. She worked as a veterinarian at a large factory, taking care of the health of cows, a large herd of pigs, and sheep. The work was challenging, but she was glad to have the opportunity to do what she loved and apply her skills after years of studying. Serafina, let it go. Look how well life turned out, a house, a husband, a future. Maybe it was worth going through all that for what we have now? Marco asked with a smile. I have a daughter now, and we got rid of the rat, my wife. I couldn't be happier with how everything turned out. It's true. Life has changed. Olivia would be happy to see how well our daughter is living now, Serafina said. They were sitting at the table, talking, and there were no arguments or problems between them. All misunderstandings were left in the past. Lorenza tried not to dwell on it. She erased the incident on the ship from her mind and tried to live for today, leaving hope for a beautiful future in her heart.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.